Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, she was within a year of retirement when an evening walk turned deadly.
And she was around here, right?
She was located right in this area here.
There's blood spatter all over the white snow.
When I looked at the injuries, it didn't look like other shootings I had seen.
She had her wallet on her, and she had ID with a photo in it. She's a 64-year-old woman walking down the sidewalk. Why would anyone want her killed?
But her killer didn't stop there. He claimed to be on a bigger mission.
There's a sense of urgency. It's my responsibility to make sure that everyone's safe here.
And the things he's saying is surreal and like remarkably disturbing.
Here now is reporter Catherine McDonald with a random encounter, a night of terror.
Some developing news to tell you about tonight from Scarborough, where police are investigating a death.
I got a call from our operations center, and at that time, all we knew was that a person was found by a passerby, by a person walking down the street, with injuries that appeared to be a gunshot wound.
Now, officers were called to the McCowan and Shepherd area just after 7 tonight, and that's where they discovered the body of a person on the sidewalk. They'd been shot at least once.
There was a lot of question marks. We knew very little about what had happened. The information was that it was a gunshot wound, but it was a person walking down the street that found her, which is odd because, you know, quite often when there's gunshots, we get a number of callers because it's such a loud event. But in this case, it was very close to a residential area, and we had no callers.
Police say the victim died at the scene and that the homicide squad has been called in to investigate. So far, there's no word on the victim's age or identity.
At the crime scene, I met Detective Stephen Matthews, who was my partner that night.
It was a cold night, there was snow. They had the whole section blocked off. I'm not sure where she was going that night. She was alone.
And she was around here, right?
She was located right in this area here. The victim was found with obvious injuries. She was lying in the side of the sidewalk into where the grassy median would be. Massive injuries. She had her purse with her, and when I looked at the injuries, it didn't look like other shootings I had seen.
When we got there, we saw a female lying down on the snow. You know, my job is to examine the scene, look for evidence. So at first, when we thought it was a shooting, I'm looking for firearm evidence, which obviously I didn't locate any. I'm looking, there's blood spatter all over the white snow. She had tremendous trauma to her head.
And it was later turned out to be from blunt force trauma and not as a result of a gunshot wound.
I could see her belongings near her right side. She had a reusable shopping bag, and the contents of that stuff had spilled out. So she had her phone beside her. It's not like somebody was trying to rob her and murdered her. Why would anyone do that? It's, you know, all her belongings are still there. I've seen innocent people get hurt, get murdered. I've seen people that are targeted get murdered. I can't say that I saw anything like this before.
These windows, like their home's very close here. Wouldn't these people have heard it?
We did a canvass of the street there because it's so close, and no one was able to provide any information. And I don't know if that's because of street noise or if because it was a cold night, all the windows were likely shut.
My mind starts wondering, like, different options, different possibilities, different angles we may have to investigate. I thought maybe this offense took place somewhere else, and this woman's body was discarded in the snowbank. Maybe it happened inside of a home and then she was brought out of the home. You know, maybe people in the area are so afraid of this offender that they chose not to call the police. I didn't know what we were dealing with.
The gas station had some cameras, but again, that was west of the location. It wouldn't capture the actual incident itself. and the only stores were on the north side of the street, some distance away.
While we were there, Steve got a call from 42 Division.
I was originally here at 42 Division.
You're on the desk that night.
Yes. So as we're doing the background information here, trying to find where the victim resided, an individual walked into our station several hours later, close to 10 p.m. He had blood on him. He walked up to the front counter, put a bag on the counter, and advised the officers at the front desk that he had just killed someone. While they were arresting him, they were able to look into his bag, and they seen what they believed were 3 aerosol cans taped together with wires coming out of it, leading to a battery. The individual advised the officers that it was in fact a bomb.
Coming up, who is this man who appears to have a bomb? And will police be able to evacuate the station before it goes off? A woman's body has just been discovered lying by the side of a busy street. But just as investigators are starting to assess the crime scene, a man turns up at a nearby police station and he says he's got a bomb. It turns out the 2 incidents are connected. Here now is Catherine McDonald with a random encounter, a night of terror.
This is a lot to have happen all at once. You were literally at the scene with a woman who's pronounced dead at the scene, and you're getting a call about an accused, someone claiming responsibility. How common is this?
It's very unusual for that to happen, especially to play out under these circumstances. This person that was claiming responsibility, named Saad Akhtar, claimed to have a bomb with him.
There's a sense of urgency. You have to remember that at any given time at a police station, not only do we have police officers, but we also have victims and witnesses from other investigations here. We have maintenance staff, and we have the prisoners themselves who need to be safe. So we wanted to get everyone out of the station, isolate the package to make sure that if it was detonated, no one would be injured.
We didn't have a lot of information at the time. They were coming in, and we've heard that the station is being evacuated, and that there was somebody at the front desk that came into the station and had a bag with them. That seemed very suspicious to the officers. We gathered our equipment, put it all back on our truck, and made our way to 42 Division.
So at this point, your concern is you don't want whatever's in that bag to go off.
Absolutely. So we were briefed by the staff sergeant. It was a black canvas bag. I know there were some blood stains on it, and inside of this bag we were told there were some things taped together, looked like aerosol cans, some wires, batteries, etc. While we were talking to the officers, we were made aware that the suspect was still at the station waiting to be transported out, and he was in the back of a police scout car in a parking lot. I made my way outside and spoke to the suspect. Just opened the back door and introduced myself, and I asked him do you mind if I ask you some questions about the bag that you brought in with you? He just said, yeah. He was somber, he was quiet, kept his head down a lot, soft-spoken with soft voice. He basically stated that he put something together quickly to make it look like a bomb, to scare people, but that there were no explosives in there.
Just because he says there are no explosives in that bag, we know that there are aerosol cans and there's wires. Is there a potential that that could be an explosive?
Absolutely, yes. We do deal with different types of calls, and a lot of times when we're dealing with suspicious packages or unknown packages, we are utilizing various equipment. One of the great tools that we do have is an X-ray. X-ray allows us to see inside the package without taking it apart, without touching it. On the night of February 21st, we actually did use this X-ray to verify information we had. This particular X-ray, it allows us to take remote pictures, which means after setting up our equipment, the tablet that I hold in my hand right now will receive the image. So some components of this image are pretty clear. We can see it's just your typical household, items. We can zoom in into different components of it. One of the images we are able to bring up here is a 3D image. We can do a color scheme which would pick up more of organic matter or different density type material that we might find inside a package. We examined the X-ray with the description of the items that we were given. It was exactly what was described to us: a battery, 3 aerosol cans. What we thought was a wire turned out to be a paracord just wrapped around the cans, and electric saw without any functioning ability. It was confirming for us that there was nothing that was of any concern. It turned out to be a hoax device. It wasn't a real, there was no explosives, there was no threat.
But what this man did, the fear he created, he succeeded.
To a certain extent, he has.
How long have you been an officer?
22 years.
Have you ever had a night like that?
No, I have not, no.
So you treated this as an isolated incident, only one potential explosive device that you were aware of. You weren't thinking about other people at this point.
No, we weren't thinking about other individuals involved in other bombs. We were focused on this one individual.
I spoke to one of the arresting officers. That officer told me the circumstances of the arrest, that Sad Akhtar had walked into the station. He was alerted by the front desk staff. When he came to the front desk, Akhtar had blood on his clothing, and it was around that time that Akhtar had also told him that he had discarded evidence before arriving back at the police station. That was very important to me because depending on where this evidence was, it could be tampered with, it could be picked up, it could be exposed to elements, and we could lose forensic evidence. So this is something timely that we needed to take care of. So as soon as I received that information, I knew that Detective Matthews was still at the scene, in charge of the scene. So I relayed that information to him so that he could get a canvass underway in the area of where our accused, Sad Akhtar, may have been.
Just backing up here, you haven't yet told me what we know about the woman, because we never got to know her as members of the media. Who was this woman?
So Annie Chu was 64 years old at the time of her murder. We had identified her through photo ID found in her purse.
She had her wallet on her, and she had ID with a photo in it. When I opened the ID, her wallet, and I saw her ID, it really hit me that, well, her age, she's a 64-year-old woman walking down the sidewalk. Why would anyone want her killed?
And then we look for next of kin to try and find out more about the victim and let them know what's happened to their loved one.
You're the one who has to talk to the family of this woman.
Yes. We met a large number of them at once at 42 Division. We found out she was a hardworking lady who immigrated from Hong Kong. She was ready to retire. She had a tight family that loved her very much and thought very highly of her.
In a written statement, her family tells us that Annie Hang-Kam Chiu was beloved, a natural leader who never hesitated to go above and beyond for the betterment of her family and friends. Annie was the eldest daughter of a middle-class family and the encouraging voice behind her family seeking a better life in Canada. Once in Canada, she supported herself by working at restaurants and later in a factory workshop, renting a small basement apartment. A social butterfly who loved helping others, she would help seniors with English and help them get on public transit. An avid Toronto Raptors fan who celebrated the NBA team's 2019 championship, something that brought her a lot of joy as the team had been around for almost as long as she'd been in Canada. Annie was within a year of retirement when she was murdered. What could you tell them about what happened to their loved one?
I know it's frustrating for families because they want more information, and we try to tell them that there's a point in time where we can answer all their questions. However, at this point in the investigation, it's very limited information that we can provide.
I still didn't know any relation between the two, between Sad Akhtar and Annie Chu. So those were all things that I needed to learn. And those are things that I wanted to accomplish through my interview with Sad Akhtar.
Coming up, the detective sits down with Sad Akhtar to try and get answers. A man is in custody after claiming responsibility for the murder of Annie Hang-Kam Chiu, a 64-year-old planning her retirement, seemingly killed as she walked down the street. But why Annie? We now return to a random encounter, a night of terror.
Our crime specialist, Catherine McDonald, speaks exclusively with the mother of the suspect, who says she doesn't believe her son knew the victim.
Did he know this woman?
No,
She's a stranger.
a stranger. How can anybody can kill a strange person?
Sad Akhtar's mother agreed to speak with us, but asked that her face be concealed, distraught and in disbelief ever since learning her 30-year-old son has been charged with an horrific crime.
I am crying. I cannot sleep. I said, no, my son cannot do that.
He described himself as a loner. He told me that he doesn't have any friends. He told me that he dropped out of school about 5 or 6 months prior to this event taking place, which I later learned from his parents that they weren't aware that he had dropped out. They thought he was still doing some sort of like online schooling. He was concerned that his parents are disappointed in him because he believes that he is the least successful of him and his brothers. 30 years old, he still lives with them.
The suspect's mother tells me she believes her son went to mosque on Friday, as he did every day, and she began to worry when he didn't return home. But she says it makes no sense why he would be here on Shepherd Avenue, since this was not his route home.
Okay, so this room we're in is also recording, like every other room in the station. You were notified of when you were brought here, right? I escorted him to an interview room in 41 Division. I told him, you know, I have third-hand information. It's like broken telephone. Information can change from between hands. But it's important that I get the information direct from him. And you seem very soft-spoken, so I'll just ask you to try and keep your voice up, okay? And he told me pretty much, you know, everything. Everything that was on his mind, what he had done.
Today when I went out, I had 2 bags. I had my backpack. Like, I had like power. I was thinking like, hey, how am I gonna do this?
He said he left his house around 6:10, 6:15. So I asked him, well, what were you out to do?
I had this mentality that, hey, the first good person I intercept, I would just close my eyes and just do whatever I needed to do. And I came across this one lady before, and then I was like, no, I don't know. Then I came across that lady, and then I did it. Like, this was pretty horrible.
He selected Annie because he knew he could overpower her. He told me that he wouldn't attack a child. When I asked him to clarify that, he told me, I think grade 7 under. He told me gender didn't matter. He wanted somebody that wasn't tall, so that his intention was to strike that person with a hammer. Like an actual hammer?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What kind of hammer?
$500 from stuff. But it's wrapped in duct tape. That's all you know.
So he was walking the opposite direction on Shepherd, and he actually walked past her a short distance. And after he had passed her, he made the decision to attack her. So describe to me how that happens. When you attacked this woman, what did you do with the bag?
I dropped it, and I was hitting her. Well, I tried to hit her with a hammer, and I missed initially.
He approached behind her with the hammer. He actually missed on the first attempt, and he's not sure if the hammer or his hand had struck her, like on the side of her head, the shaft of the hammer, or on her shoulder, but it caused her to fall to the ground.
And then it's pretty horrible to say, I was just punching her.
Punching her with your hand?
Yes.
While she was on the ground, he got on top of her. She eventually turned over, and that's when he was able to get his hammer in hand again.
And then I all of a sudden I picked up the hammer and then hit her, and then I'm pretty sure I saw her skull broke. After that, I wanted to do more because I chose to do more. I'll be honest. When I was attacking that lady, a guy just passed by his bicycle and he looked, he didn't do anything. So I mean, if I wanted to do more, I could have done more. But then I don't know. I just lost the stomach for it.
Police were unable to identify this mystery man on the bicycle, but they found corroboration of Saad Akhtar's account from another source.
Fortunately, there was an attentive business owner that had noticed in his surveillance cameras the emergency vehicles parked out front of his business, contacted someone he knew, and was able to send us clips of from his business that showed the actual incident itself from a distance. So we had an idea of what transpired from the interview with Mr. Akhtar, but it confirmed what he told us had happened. So Mr. Akhtar came west along Shepherd to Midland, came south along Midland to the bus shelter here, which is located across from 2240 Midland Avenue, and disposed the hammer at the south end of the seat near the edge of the bus shelter. And that's where the murder weapon was located.
As you're hearing him talk about his plans that he changed his mind on because, as you said, he felt sick to his stomach, what are you thinking?
You know, my mindset is very much focused on the evidence. And the things he's saying is surreal and like remarkably disturbing. But I'm trying not to focus on the reality of what he's telling me, but what's the next step? What else do I need to know while he's talking? At any point, I could offend him, or he could flick the switch and all of a sudden not want to talk to me anymore. So my goal is to get as much information as I possibly can, and I still had a lot of questions.
Mr. Akhtar told them about putting a note by the victim, and it was in a plastic bag, which I recall seeing, and initially I didn't pay a whole lot of attention. It looked like it had been something that perhaps fell out of her purse.
And I walked away and then I came back with the note there. And there was one note in my pocket which I left next to that lady.
How long is it? How long was the note?
Like 1 sentence. And I mean, I just wanted to let people know why. It just says this is for the Islamic State.
So he returned with a note in a Ziploc bag, and he tucked it underneath Annie. And that note said, Islamic State, Bakia.
So that is basically the war cry, if you will, of ISIS. All right? So Bakia means remaining, we're here. Right? That was their hurrah cry. And so that's why. And it was to make it very clear that it was not just him pledging allegiance to ISIS, but doing it in support of ISIS.
And what did you think that this man said that he was motivated by terrorism? What did you think, thinking back at the potential for what could have happened that night?
At the time, I didn't think of it as a potential terrorist attack. We weren't necessarily thinking of terrorists. However, we always have to start thinking about that sort of information.
Coming up, using forensics to determine if Saad Akhtar acted alone, or if he's part of a bigger terrorist network with more attacks in the works. When a Toronto homicide case turns into a full-scale terrorism investigation, police must try and determine if more attacks are planned. Here now is a random encounter, a night of terror.
So it's a lot to be taking on, hearing the word terrorism. We've covered other terrorism cases, you've read about them, but this one doesn't seem to be like the others. Have you ever dealt with a terror case before?
This was my first terrorism investigation.
A terror plot busted by the RCMP.
Oh, people of Canada.
The latest bone-chilling, slick propaganda video from ISIS is directed at Canadians.
We have a shocking story tonight about one of the so-called Toronto 18.
Part of the alleged plot included storming Parliament Hill and beheading the Prime Minister.
The Scarborough mother accused of this ISIS-inspired attack.
The top Kurdish commander says he expects ISIS sleeper cells to seek revenge. There is still considerable momentum for radicals.
What did you think when you heard that he admitted that this was an act of terror?
Well, it changes the investigation, and then it adds different things that now become a priority.
30-year-old Saad Akhtar was already accused in the apparent random killing, but his charge has now been upgraded to, quote, first-degree murder, including terrorist activity. It's unclear if Akhtar is attached to any particular terrorist group.
Are you part of any groups?
No, this was it, and I thought today it was going to be on, it was going to be done.
Do you know of anybody else that has plans that are going to cause harm to other people?
Like I said, it's like a lone attack, and that's about it.
So how can you, as a forensic officer, help determine if there's more than one person involved?
You let the scene speak to you, see what you find. All these little clues will tell us if there's more than one person involved. So the note that was left at the scene next to the deceased, as well as this note, were seized.
There were two notes left, but this is the one that was found where?
So this is the one that found the backpack that was discarded by the accused in the hydro field. So not where the deceased was. This was a few kilometers away in a hydro field. You know, it says this is for the Islamic State and all the crimes against Muslims. God is great. So we've seized the note, photographed it, and I've used a chemical to enhance it to examine it for fingerprints, essentially. And what we located here, just in the back side of this note, just in the top corner, is a bunch of friction ridges. So the way we find prints, once we've examined them, we mark them, we place a 20mm scale next to the friction ridges, and we photograph it. And as you look closely, you'll see different minutiae, different characteristics. And that photograph was submitted to APHIS, and it came back as a positive identification for the accused right palm.
So there's a lot of evidence. There's the handwriting analysis, there's her blood, her DNA, right?
When he was arrested, he had bloody clothing on him still. So we seized those clothing and we submitted them for DNA analysis. And sure enough, the deceased blood was located on his pants. And I don't think we found anything to suggest that somebody else was involved in that particular incident.
In a joint statement, the RCMP and Toronto Police say the public can be assured this appears to be an isolated incident, and there is no further known threat to the public associated with the accused at this time.
This was one of the first terrorist murder prosecutions in Canadian history. There was one earlier charge laid. This was the second. So this particular provision was enacted in 2001 with the Anti-Terrorism Act, which was Parliament's response to 9/11. Even if the offender did not plan and deliberate the killing of a person, the fact that they killed a person in the course of committing a terrorist act automatically legally deems it or classifies it as a first-degree murder. And when he turned himself in, he very promptly acknowledged and proclaimed proudly that this was a terrorist attack. So we had to develop a sort of a working relationship with the Ontario Crown to advance the prosecution jointly.
We learned early on that it appeared to be motivated by what had been absorbed by him as a result of his time spent on the internet.
There were materials produced by certain extremists on his computer. His browsing history for Google and his search history showed an interest in recent terrorist attacks committed in other parts of the world.
How does someone like Saad Akhtar go from watching content online to actually planning and committing a crime like the one he did?
Yeah, so, you know, when a person is consuming this material, psychologists talk about a number of factors that come into play. For example, what's called vicarious suffering, okay? Where you are watching videos of your people, however you construct that term, being persecuted, harmed, injured, then what will happen is you start to feel that you are harmed and injured. So it becomes, you know, it's look at what's happening, what are you doing about this? You have a role to play. You as an individual can do something about it.
And we see this is a phenomenon that we see with ISIS, but also across the ideological spectrum, whether it's a fascist cause or a racist cause or an anti-Semitic or an Islamophobic or a misogynist. Lots of extremist groups use techniques like this and then send their messages out into the world.
That second note saying that I'm doing this to justify you know, the killings of Muslims worldwide, this follows again the ideology, because even the Boston Marathon bombers, the younger brother who was, you know, captured alive, he was hiding in some guy's boat. Well, he scrawled on the surface of the boat, "We're doing this because of, you know, your military ventures in Iraq and Afghanistan." The Parliament Hill attacker in Ottawa did the same thing, left a video message saying, "I'm doing this for my brothers in Afghanistan." So this follows this idea, and this is one of the drivers of extremism, of violent extremism, the foreign policy grievances. Ideology without grievances doesn't resonate, and grievances without ideology are not acted upon.
I don't know that it's correct to say he was obsessed with ISIS. I know that he expressed, you know, to the police support generally for sort of the ISIS cause. He had no contact with ISIS, he had no connections with ISIS, but he supported that cause, he expressed that. But he also expressed that he may have been acting as a sort of a suicidal gesture, that he was hoping sort of a suicide by police. He also had a lot of other complex psychological motivations going on. So was terrorism the motive? Partly, perhaps.
In the psychiatric assessment, he says, "I would have killed someone anyway, even if not for the same cause." Though he was not sure why, he thought that he needed to vent. As his defense counsel, were terror charges the right charges here?
I don't, that's a good question.
Coming up, Saad Akhtar's legal team looks into his mental health. Can it make the case he was not criminally responsible for Annie's murder? That's after the break. Saad Akhtar has been charged with first-degree murder, including terrorist activity. Will Annie Hang-Kam Chiu's family members get the justice they're seeking? Here now is reporter Catherine McDonald with the conclusion of a random encounter, a night of terror.
64-year-old Hang-Kam Annie Chu was walking along Shepherd near Markham Friday when she was bludgeoned to death. The mother of the accused telling Global News she had no idea who the victim is. The mother went on to tell us that she believes the suspect has untreated mental health issues, and she wanted him to get medical help, but he refused.
He was failing his exam, so he was very upset. Depression.
She says her son, who was studying computer programming at Ryerson and had just completed a year-long co-op at the University Health Network, was diagnosed with ADHD when he was a teen and had obsessive-compulsive disorder, and feared he had mental health issues. You believed he needed medicine?
Yeah, medicine or health, whatever he needed. But he refused to go, then what can I?
I interviewed his father first, and I also interviewed his mother and his brother. So my takeaway is that none of them saw any sort of extremist views in their son, in their brother. His mom talked about kind of like an obsessive-compulsive disorder that he demonstrates when he's doing things over and over and over again. Have you ever had any delusions? Have you ever?
I have, like, in terms of mental issues, I have compulsive forgetfulness. Like, I would check, like, if I lock the door, I would check it repeatedly.
Check the door, check the door, check the door, not even remembering that he had just checked it.
Have you ever seen a psych doctor for any reason? Like a psychiatrist or psychologist? No.
Section 16 is the provision of the code which provides a defense for people who have a mental disorder and are not criminally responsible for their actions. Section 16 and mental disorder was explored in this case by Mr. Akhtar's defense lawyer.
A lot of people come in and deny or come in and try to come up with some story. I mean, he didn't do that.
Mm-hmm. He owned up to what he did.
Yeah. I come away seeing a person who is suffering from a lot of untreated mental health issues that led him into a lot of dysfunctional behavior, including becoming interested in ISIS.
Mr. Akhtar was assessed by a very credible forensic psychiatrist, and it was clear that, as I say, he was a troubled individual, and he had severe OCD, he had severe depression, he had some suicidal ideations, but he was sane.
The psychiatric assessment of criminal responsibility was conducted by Dr. Lisa Ramshaw. She spoke with Saad Akhtar in August and September of 2020 while he was in detention. Dr. Ramshaw did not wish to be interviewed.
Dr. Ramshaw concluded that Mr. Akhtar was criminally responsible. He was capable of knowing that society would view his actions as wrong, as morally wrongful, as indefensible.
You have to be essentially so ill that you don't know what you're doing, or your perceptions are so distorted that you don't know what you're doing is wrong. Dr. Ramshaw's opinion was that Mr. Akhtar was not in that state. We didn't advance that defense. We didn't advance any defense. He pleaded guilty.
A Toronto man who admitted to a fatal hammer attack last year in the name of the Islamic State has been sentenced to life in prison. Saad Akhtar pleaded guilty to murder and terrorist activity for the February 2020 attack. He told the court he approached a random victim and used a hammer to beat her to death. Akhtar, who had pledged allegiance to ISIS, was sentenced to life with no eligibility for parole for at least 25 years. This case marks Canada's first conviction for the crime of murder and terrorist activity.
I think one of the unique characteristics that maybe showed that he was criminally responsible was I believe he admitted afterwards that he had planned to kill others, but he said he didn't have the stomach to do it.
You're right. He started the plan. He killed Miss Chu, and then it was more difficult than he imagined. And that was an indication of some rationality, of sanity.
He really did show that he was well prepared based on what he told the psychiatrist about all that planning.
He was prepared for the possibility of losing his initial weapon, his initial hammer, and having a backup weapon. He taped up his hammers so that he could maintain his grip in the course of the attack. So there was a significant degree of planning and deliberation to this.
He talked in his statement about the fact that he had urges to hurt others, including his neighbor, and he also broke items in his home. How did that play into what happened that day?
Well, on his own account, he had that those obsessive thoughts about violence. And there's no doubt that he ended up acting out violently against the victim in this case.
Did he seem angry?
He looks angry, very tense.
His mother told Global News in an exclusive interview on Monday that the family left Pakistan in 2001 because she and her husband were concerned about terrorism.
My son got very religious for 3-4 years.
Why would he allegedly do this?
I don't know, there's no reason.
But you can't help but think, did they not see something in their son? Was there a warning sign they could have seen, in your opinion?
I think they just have to know their son. I think he was a loner, and he was allowed to be a loner and spend time in his room by himself. you know, learning about whatever he was learning about online.
You yourself told me you were radicalized at one time. Do you see any similarities in terms of how you and Saad were drawn to extremism?
So I think there are a few common elements. And so in my particular story, I mean, I'm born and raised here. This identity crisis, culture and religion calling me one way, secular society calling me another way. So you can see in Mr. Akhtar's trajectory, there is an element of that identity crisis. Who is he supposed to be? I mean, his parents are not religious. They don't come from an overly religious family. I would say the ideological indoctrination is the other thing. Sometimes when a person is OCD, if they're introduced to an ideology that is very rigid and is very regimented, that will then just take that person to a whole other degree of involvement. I work with an organization, Parents for Peace, where we deal with kids who are radicalized and they're either in jail or sometimes not in jail. In his particular case, the parents, they already knew that he was having problems, but then it's not like he was waving an ISIS flag around or engaging in deep philosophical, ideological discussions with the parents. Those would be warning signs. He just didn't exhibit any of those.
What impact do you think these kind of attacks, Islamic attacks, have on members of the Muslim community?
It makes the community feel like, oh, here we go again. Or, oh, now we have to answer, all of us have to answer for what this one guy did or what those people did. The whole community is left to deal with the results of it.
Near the end of the interview, I asked him about what would he say to Annie if he could say something to her. He didn't say that, he would apologize or he would take back what he has done. And then I asked him, well, what would you say to her family? And when I asked him that, he said, well, what am I going to say? Is sorry going to make a difference? Yeah.
Ms. Chu was adored by her family, and she was a classic innocent victim in every way imaginable. And certainly the impact of her loss on her family and the community was devastating.
One of the things that I find so perplexing about this case is you had this contact with Annie Chu's family, but it was a different murder. Yes, it was random, but there was a terror motive behind it. How did you explain that to them, and how did they accept that?
You're right. It was weighing on them heavily because in many respects, it was my impression that they were somewhat relieved to know that it was random, but it continued to unnerve them that such an act could take place in their community.
So when you told them that this was an episode of a show that was going to be airing, they wanted to participate. They said, we'd like you to read this on our behalf. And why was that?
Well, they want the public to understand how cherished their aunt and sister was. But also, at some level, they don't want their loved one's death to be completely in vain. And they write as follows. As her family, it pains us to reflect on the what-ifs had she not met her tragic fate on the night of February 21st, 2020. What if she were able to pack up and go travel to the countries that she had on her retirement bucket list? What if she had been able to look forward to the pension that she had worked so hard for over the years? What if she had been able to see her nieces and nephew having their own children? What if she really had a chance for the first time in her life to live carefree? Justice will never fully be served for those of us who knew Annie. She stood for everything that was right, and we hope that she will be remembered as such. Sincerely, the family of Annie Hang-Kam Chiu.
Annie's family says they will continue to honor her memory, remembering her as the life of the party and the one who'd organize family gatherings for dim sum and Chinese New Year. They say as long as everyone was well taken care of, she was happy. Saad Akhtar is currently serving an indeterminate sentence and does not have a statutory release date. He won't be eligible for day parole or unescorted temporary absences until 2042. We reached out to members of Saad Akhtar's family, and they did not wish to comment. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.